viewers, welcome back to Dukascopy TV. Well, we do have something very special for you today. We have a debate. We have Frank Hollenbeck and John Hancock who are going to go head to head in terms of Europe. Has Europe hit a wall? Now, Frank, you are bearish on this topic, and John, you are bullish. So first of all, Frank, do you think Europe has actually hit a wall?
Well, I think a lot of the austerity measures, there's been very little really structural adjustments have been made. Take, for example, Greece. They've done very little in the privatization, and there's an enormous amount of public assets that need to be sold. And I think the problem in Europe is a belief that they can continue with their model, a bit like Russia thought they could continue with the communist model, and they can't. They have to restructure the entire thing. And before we realize that particular point, we're going to go through some very bad times, I'm afraid.
What are you thinking?
What I'm thinking is, a year ago we were all expecting Europe to explode. I mean, if you had gone to Davos, not this year, but the year before, everyone was predicting a Greek exit, they were predicting a Spanish default, they were predicting bond crisis in Italy, and it hasn't materialized. I would agree with Frank that restructuring is important. I mean, there's this famous quotation, no good crisis should go to waste. And in some respects, I don't think Europe may not have exploited the crisis to the full, but it hasn't wasted the crisis. I mean, we've survived the storm. We've got Croatia lining up to join. EU Council of Ministers has just passed a budget, a 7-year budget that involves some unpopular things like budget cuts. Interestingly, the one roadblock to this budget is the Euro Parliament that everyone has dismissed as being anemic and useless. In fact, it's becoming a real parliament with real teeth, and this European democratic deficit, even that seems to be changing. So am I bearish? Am I bullish on Europe? Maybe not bullish, but I'm a cautious optimist.
I know Latvia actually wants to join the euro as well. Now, I know you don't think that's a good idea for Latvia.
Not for the moment, because like I indicated in my previous interview, I think that there are troubles coming down the road, and there's no need for it to join the euro since it's doing relatively well, and would do relatively well with the lat if it stayed on the lat, then joining the euro and bearing the consequences of the changes that will need to be implemented in the future.
So yeah, funnily enough, some countries are, still want to be a part of the Eurozone. Now, in terms of the European Union, Britain has been talking about trying to get out of the European Union. They feel like it's not doing anything for them. I know our Irish Taoiseach Prime Minister thinks he's kind of afraid that they're going to leave as Britain, plays quite an important role. Now, guys, what do you think? Do you think it'll help Britain? Britain will actually benefit from it? And of course, in terms of Europe, will it be good, will it be bad? What do you think?
Well, I think you need to distinguish between the EU and EU governments. I think Britain has gained a lot from being part of the EU, just like you gain a lot from opening up your economy to trade. I think what Britain is against is the EU government. It's not like we're going to have, an EU government and no state governments. In other words, we're probably just putting another layer of government bureaucracy on top of the country bureaucracies that we have. We have to remember that the United States was essentially formed as states, and that the U.S. federal government was actually only there for national defense and was actually supposed to play a relatively small role. And it's because of being able to impose an income tax, being able to print money and being able to borrow, that we now have this monstrosity that we call the U.S. government that tries to interfere in every world conflict possible. And I'm afraid if we were to go down that road to have an EU government where we would have the same trend that we saw in the United States, that ultimately we'd end up with something that would happen in World War I. A relatively minor event would lead us to World War. I just don't see having two bullies in the courtyard and then peacefully coexist. I think ultimately there would be a bully that would try to take out the other one. So I'd rather deal with the problem right away and not create the bully in the first place.
John, what are you thinking?
That's an interesting view, Frank. I mean, part of this debate about the bully is who exactly is the bully? I mean, who are British voters focusing on and worried about when they talk about renegotiating their partnership in Europe? I get the sense that that part of the problem with Britain is that they don't actually know what they want to renegotiate. There's this sort of visceral dislike or mistrust of Britain that goes back not just decades but probably centuries. Britain has suspicions of what the plans of Brussels are, or whether there's a continental hegemony developing. But when you get down to brass tacks, what is it they want to change about Europe? Often there's very little in terms of substance on the agenda. I also suspect that David Cameron and the cabinet, if you actually got them behind closed doors, would say, well, we actually think Europe's done pretty well and Europe's buddling along better than we expected. And it sure beats the alternative. People forget what the alternative is. Cast your mind back 70 years. That was the alternative. Europe was a construction that came out of not so much the desire for free trade, but the desire not to enter into another world war. And we are living in an era, we take it for granted, of remarkable European integration. Where we live, Frank, even in Switzerland, that is not a member of the EU, you can effortlessly drive across the border into France without even showing a passport. You drive past the cement bunkers that were erected in 1938-39 to prevent a German invasion. So when you have the debate about Britain's membership in the EU, it's important to ask, what are the alternatives? What exactly alternative world would British voters like?
That's a very good opinion, John. Thank you very much. Now, in terms of solutions, a transatlantic trade agreement, what do you guys think?
Well, for manufacturing products, a lot of the tariffs are less than 3%. But in general, what we have is when we have trade agreements, usually both parties wins. That's the beauty of capitalism, is that a voluntary exchange leads to a win-win situation. And I'm sure John will agree with this, is that it can only be a gain for both the U.S. and for Europe. Even more important is that we have what is called, I think, the Trans-Pacific decisions that are going to be made in 2015, which will open up free trade to almost 40% of world GDP will be opened up to trade with an agreement between the U.S. and Asian Pacific nations. Also, we have a situation that if we open up trade with the U.S., we also have trade agreements with Latin America, so they would have a much greater impact than just the relationship between the EU and the U.S.
Look, I completely agree with Frank on this one. If this agreement actually does result in freer flowing trade between Europe and the United States or North America, a more secure and free flowing investment environment, that's all for the good. I have to say, I think what is not being said in this debate is the grander or larger geoeconomic strategy that lies behind it. I don't think this Trans-Pacific or transatlantic partnership, like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, is just about trade. I think it's about Europe and the United States losing leverage and power in the global economic system. I mean, for over 10 years, the United States and China have been deadlocked in the Doha round of trade negotiations. The United States is essentially asking China to undertake reciprocal tariff reduction, reciprocal market access, and China's saying, no thanks, we're quite happy with the status quo. So part of this gain, part of this alliance is for Europe and the United States to join forces and to try to force the pace of global trade talks. Will it work? Will it bring China, India, and some of these emerging giants back to the table, or will it cause deeper splits in the world trade system? That's a high roll of the dice and a very interesting question, but I don't have a guess.
Well, trade is win-win, and I think a lot of the pressures actually come from special interests, in the sense that if trade means that a lot of your industry may disappear, you have a great incentive to put political pressure that that trade agreement doesn't exist or doesn't get put into place. So I agree with mostly, but I think it's primarily special interests of the losers that make it difficult to implement a lot of these trade talks.
Thank you very much. Now, just to finish off this, if you have one word to describe how you feel about the future of Europe, what would it be? I would say my one word is hope. Now, what's yours?
Dismal.
better than the past, but that's 3 words.
Just one.
Can I think of a better word? You
Sorry,
used it.
I can use it. You can use a
dismal.
better word.
Dismal.
I think
Come on, maybe we should do it again. Yeah, you're right. Right.
Let me think of a better word than dismal.
Dismal was quite good. I
You
like
think so?
dismal. I
Okay.
just couldn't think of a one. It was
It
the
just
opposite
came
of
up.
dismal.
Yeah, because you came up with 3 words.
Pollyannish.
Yeah.
That's right.
Mine would be dangerous.
Mine would be optimism.
dangerous, optimism, hope. Well, thanks very much. Well, viewers, I hope you enjoyed this, and do stay tuned to Dukascopy TV for more economic updates and forex analysis. But for now, goodbye.